As you know, I'm researching positive life experiences and meaningful hobbies and activities. Can you please tell me the story of your experience with writing and what writing means to you?
What writing means to me? Everything. It means... the best thing to do is to sort of go back to the beginning and tell you how it all began. It all started when I was in college, actually. I had, back in 2003, I was inspired by things like, I hate to sort of sound cliche, but I was inspired by Lord of the Rings, I was inspired by things like Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. These are really good computer games. I was inspired by anything and everything, really. And in turn, these sort of inspirations made me write down my own pieces, draw my own characters, create my own world map. And it's not like overnight you have all this sort of information and all this artwork. It takes over a period of years and years and years. So it's very hard to sort of pinpoint when this actually all started, because I can argue, the book started, the first book I wrote, the Utopian Dream, started in 2007 in October, 9:30, 9:30 I think it was, whilst everyone was out partying and getting completely wasted, which I did for a bit. I didn't deny myself the university life, but whilst everyone was doing that, I was working on this book of mine. But when it started, it's a bit hazy, because, like I said, you're inspired by things like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and these great other artworks and books. And so you start off just doodling and drawing and collecting ideas, and by 2003, when I was in college, I was 16, pushing 17 years old. It was such a long time ago now, like over 15 years ago. That's how long I've been working on this thing. It's crazy when you think about it like that. All this work sort of congregated and it all gathered and into this big folder. You could do weights on this folder. There was everything from notes to drawings to everything. All my ideas just poured into this folder at random. There's no order to it. It's just chaotic mess of just words and drawings. And I presented this, and I took the best parts of this project, this folder, and I created interesting characters, and they were well developed and they were fleshed out, and they had their costumes and they had their armor and they had their backgrounds and introductions, their own stories, and there were a good few dozen of these characters, and then in turn I presented the world map, and that got me into university. It was this random mess of nonsense of just ideas splurged out onto paper that I filtered and I presented for my college work when I was about 17 years old. I started from there. 9:15, October, in my dorm room, I started writing this thing, and it wasn't one of those things that sort of, you don't just wake up and decide to be a writer. You don't do that. Well, I guess some people do. I like to meet people like this. If it is a snap decision, then I'd like to hear their story. Everyone has a different story. But mine, it was a sort of a dawning realization that the only format I had, the only avenue I had to express myself was through this story. And I guess that's how it kind of all began. It becomes your world. Once you realise that you've started writing, you've wrote those first few pages, and believe me, I've wrote many drafts of the first book. It's called The Ancestral Odyssey, the Utopian Dream, as you well know. I wrote many drafts of it. I think I've got to about 8 or 9 drafts now. And when you compare the first draft to the last draft, the differences are insane. Because, like I said, when you're world building, you start off with what's cool. When you're a kid, when you're 17, you start off like, this guy's going to have this, and this girl's going to be like that, and they're going to believe in this. And then when you start to break down your characters, because I think that's sort of the main drive of your story, the characters. You can have the greatest story in the world, but if it's not driven, if it's not carried by the characters, then you've got nothing. People relate to the characters, so you kind of start there. And so when you design a character, for example, and you draw him a necklace, and you draw him a piece of armor, or if he wears leather, or if he's got a different colour of skin perhaps, or his hair's weird. I don't know. It depends. I mean, you know, take your pick. But for example, the pendant around his neck, where did that come from? What does it symbolise? Who made it? You know, and then that pendant in itself becomes a sort of a side story. Has he got a ring on his finger? You know, if he's married or not. His armour. I mean, if you've read the first book, which I hope you have, you'll know that a particular culture in the story, it's the Norcan culture from Dathia. Their land is riddled with iron mines, and naturally, what comes with iron, you know, hard armour. You know, and so when you're describing a character from the Kundathia culture, the Norcrans, they tend to wear hard armour. And what does hard armour do to the body? It makes the body tough. It makes it strong. If they're walking around in chainmail and hard armour, they tend to be stocky-looking kind of guys. Whereas in the southeastern lands, in the country is Avulian, and the Davidian people, they wear leather. So their leather brand, that they've got more of a lighter sort of attack method, whereas the Norcrans are more heavier. So just that little piece of information has given you, you know, an idea of what the land's like, what idea the people are like, and you break it down like that. And after years of doing this, you will build, and you've created not one but half a dozen countries with their own cultures. And then that's not even going into details of faith, religions, and politics, and what their buildings are like, what weapons they use. But what really fascinates me with writing is the knowledge. The fact that you can learn, you're constantly learning. I've just been talking about, you know, iron and leather and things, but when you want to get into details, one of the first things I saw, I mean, it's natural for writers to hit a sort of a wall now and again. It's natural for us to sort of have writer's block. Now, most people would say that writer's block is sort of take a walk, have a shower, have some food, have coffee. But I disagree with this. I think you should, if you're suffering writer's block, keep going, because you might be writing garbage, but you can turn garbage into gold. It's said that stories aren't written, they're rewritten, and that's exactly true. I just said, you know, I mean, I've wrote this thing 9 times, and when you look at draft 1 and compare it to draft 8 and 9, they're completely different stories. It's a remnant. You get remnants of pieces from draft 1 in draft 9. It's like almost a different story. But anyway, I've digressed again. But when you talk about world building and the knowledge you learn whilst writing these things, you want to sort of create a sense of realism. Now, my book is fantasy. It's epic fantasy. I have created something completely new, or it's in essence a shadow of what J.R.R. Tolkien did. I mean, everyone who works within my realm knows that Tolkien came first. I mean, yeah, you can go back before Tolkien, but he was the first one that brought the fantasy genre to life. And then Peter Jackson came along, and his team made a trilogy, which I think is one of the best trilogies out there. But what I'm trying to say is, when you start to look at the little pieces of how to create your own world, the first wall I hit was something bizarre. It was to do with glass. If you've got glass, if your culture can create and make glass, what else was around at the time? Now, glass has a long history. For example, like it has a history for about 5,000 years, but it wasn't until the 17th century where the typical Englishman had access to glass windows, whereas royalty had it since the 14th century. Now, none of this actually makes a difference in your world, but if you can put a nod in that direction, it gives the world more realism. It gives it more sort of depth. Same with gunpowder. Gunpowder it originated in China, I think it was, in the 10th century. There is gunpowder in my story. It's mainly swords, but when the gunpowder comes around, when black powder and, you know, firearms come into it, it's a good idea to research what we had, the first sort of brand of rifle, you know, the first firearm, and it's good to research that and have a look at what they were doing, and then take what we know, take what was real, and then just colour it in. Because real life can be a bit grey and dull sometimes. It can be. It's fascinating, but I don't have to live by the rules. I can take the best parts of history, and I can colour them in and make them fascinating and fantastical and create something that's my own, if that makes any kind of sense. But it's just, writing is everything for me, you know. Not only does it help me express myself in the best way possible, but I get to learn about the world, learn about human beings, learn about our cultures, learn about religion. When I was creating my own religion, I studied the Quran, I studied Christianity, I studied Judaism, and there are thousands of religions out there. And I crafted my own through studying these religions. Now, I'm not a religious man, but I find religion fascinating. It's incredible. And some of my favourite movies, of course, like Constantine and Devil's Advocate and Kingdom of Heaven, which is a massively underrated movie.
When I was a kid, I could see things. Things humans aren't supposed to see. Things you shouldn't have to see. My parents were normal. They did what most parents would do. They made it worse. Think you're crazy long enough, you find a way out.
You try to kill yourself.
I didn't try anything. Officially, I was dead for 2 minutes. But when you cross over, time stops. Take it from me, 2 minutes in hell is a lifetime. When I came back, I knew all the things I could see were real. Heaven and hell are right here, behind every wall, every window. The world behind the world, and we're smack in the middle. Angels and demons can't cross over onto our plane, so instead we get what I call half-breeds. The influence peddlers. They can only whisper in our ears, but a single word could give you courage or turn your favorite pleasure into your worst nightmare. Those with the demon's touch, like those part angel, living alongside us, they call it the balance. I call it hypocritical bullshit. So when a half-breed breaks the rules, I deport their sorry ass straight back to hell. I don't get them all, but I've been hoping to get enough to ensure my retirement.
I don't understand.
I'm a suicide, Angela. When I die, the rules say I've got just one place to go.
You're trying to buy your way into heaven.
What would you do if you were sentenced to a prison where half the inmates were put there by you?
I guess God has a plan for all of us.
God's a kid with an ant farm, lady. He's not planning anything.
When we were little, Isabel saw things too. Dodson.
Let me give you a little inside information about God. God likes to watch. He's a prankster. Think about it. He gives man instincts. He gives you this extraordinary gift, and then what does he do? I swear, for his own amusement, his own private cosmic gag reel, he sets the rules in opposition. It's the goof of all time. Look, but don't touch. Touch, but don't taste. Taste, don't swallow. And while you're jumping from one foot to the next, what is he doing? He's laughing his sick fucking ass off. He's a tight ass. He's a sadist. He's an absentee landlord. Worship that? Never.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, is that it?
Why not? I'm here on the ground with my nose in it since the whole thing began. I've nurtured every sensation man has been inspired to have. I cared about what he wanted, and I never judged him. Why? Because I never rejected him. In spite of all his imperfections, I'm a fan of man. I'm a humanist. Maybe the last humanist. Who, in their right mind, Kevin, could possibly deny the 20th century was entirely mine? All of it, Kevin! All of it. Mine. I'm peaking, Kevin. It's my time now.
I love these movies, you know, and they're all very heavily religious based. So why, I beg the question, why wouldn't anyone want to be a writer? Why wouldn't you want to be a writer? Why wouldn't you want to write anything? It's inspirational, and I guess that's my question posed to all of you listening. Why aren't you writing something? When you're traveling, take a notebook with you, take a little laptop. You've got no excuse. Technology's on our side. You know, you can write anything. And when it comes to writers, you know, there's no set rule book. You can write whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. I mean, obviously, if you're writing something that's like a crime thriller or something, yes, you need to do research on police work and detective work, and it's important to get your facts straight. But like what I do is, because I work in epic fantasy, I take the best parts of history and learning about castles and how they lived in those days, and armor and how they made armor and iron and glass and all, you know, name it. You learn about it, and you listen to people about it, and you talk to people about it, and you read about it. And if you work on your project for a few months, for a few years, you have something to be proud of. Now, like I said, going back to the beginning, you can argue I started this in 2003 when I was an artist, when I was in graphics, looking at characters, and I started the writing in 2007. But in my opinion, it's linked. You know, it's connected. You know, I couldn't just start in 2007. I needed that few years beforehand to sort of do my research. I didn't know I was doing research. I was just doing what naturally came to me. It dawned on me, like I said, it's not a snap decision, it just dawns on me. And another thing that I think I should mention real quick, one of my all-time favourite people, I mean, unfortunately he's dead, he died in 2011. I mentioned this, I can't help but not mention his name. I have to mention him now and again because he's such an inspiration to me. A journalist, Christopher Hitchens. He, if you listen to him, I mean, I think most people know who he is, but if you don't, he was a journalist, he was a writer, he was a public speaker, he had such a great voice, such an articulate, cultured accent, it was incredible. And one of the things he taught his students, one of the things he said to the people he taught was, writing isn't something that you like to do or want to do, it's something you feel like you should have to do. You know, it's something you can't live without. If you've got that, then you will survive the coming rejections, which you will get rejected. Everyone gets rejected, everybody. But like I said, if you've got that sort of that drive, that need, that focus to do it, and believe in yourself and believe in your own work, which I do, I believe wholeheartedly that I'm writing something, or trying to write something unique, trying to write something colourful and diverse and epic and grand and beautiful and wonderful and horrible and dark and, you know, throw in the words, then you'll survive it. You will survive the rejections because you've got that love for writing. I do have it, even though sometimes it kills me and drives me insane.
If students were to watch this tape, this partial rendering of your intellectual journey, is there one lesson that you think they might draw from your journey that stands out?
Well, the only ones I would think would be interested in hearing from me would be those who have writing in mind as a career. I would expect. And I do draw students sometimes to my class in New York for that reason. And yes, I do have advice that may sound incredibly tautological, but isn't. You should first ask yourself if you really have to write. In other words, not is it something you'd like to do or have heard could be rewarding or enjoyable, or you think might, has it ever occurred to you that you have no choice but to write? There's always someone, when I say this in a room full of students, who looks at me suddenly as if, how did you know that? That's how I do know. And if that's true, then it's fine. It will work, you will get it done. You may not be a howling success at it, but at least you will know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's a pleasure lots of people don't have. And conversely, if you don't feel that, you might want to try something else. Because I doubt you'd be able to survive the disappointments that are inevitable. So, it may sound to those who are immune that that's too easy to say, but actually it took me a long time to work it out, and I found that it works as advice to those who need it.
But when I talk about writing something original and unique, I guess there are some of you who are now, people who are in the writing business will know that that's impossible. Everything, when we're sitting in this room right now, surrounded by hundreds of books, all of them have been done before. Another one of my idols, his name's Kurt Vonnegut, actually broke this down. He drew a graph. Again, he was a well-known author. One of my favourite books he wrote was Slaughterhouse 5. If you haven't read it soon. Go out and get it now. It's a remarkable read. It's one of my favourites. But what he said is, well, not what he said, what he demonstrated to his students. He drew on this chalkboard of his. He made 3 lines, and on these 3 lines, every story ever written fits onto this graph. And it might be a fool's errand, but I've been trying to write my own line. I've been trying to draw my own line, go against what he sort of taught, go against his sort of, one of his laws in the writing world, you know. So far, my story does follow along one of his lines. If you haven't, you can see the video on YouTube, or if you've got one of his special DVDs, I'm not sure, they're probably out there, but he goes into a lot of depth about stories falling into categories, and my story does, the first one at least, falls into one of these lines. I'll let you guess which one if you watch the video. But Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse 5, I suggest you get it. So, with all that being said, I've just sort of scratched the surface of why I love writing. You learn so much and you do so much, and it's something to be proud of. Why aren't you writing? Why aren't you doing it? You know, make some notes. And the best thing about it is you get an excuse to drink large amounts of alcohol at ungodly hours and drink your body weight in coffee, of course, whilst writing. I mean, you will do it at some point, because you will fall down that rabbit hole. You will go a bit mad. When you're writing a scene, when you're in depth with a scene, people will ask you, what have you been doing today? You know, where have you been? You know, you look pale, you look underfed. You have a sandwich, for God's sake. Have a shower. And it's like, shit. You're right, I do. And people ask you, where have you been? And so I've been writing this scene about blah, 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 and this is this, and they'll look at you like you're a madman. Absolute madman.
So going back to the start, you mentioned you're inspired by Lord of the Rings and some video games. Can you tell me why?
How could you not be inspired by things like Lord of the Rings? I mean, I read it. I'm a bit guilty actually, because I read it after the films had come out. I was sort of drawn in, sucked into the incredible special effects and the monsters, and so I didn't read the books first. I read them afterwards, and I think how could you not be inspired by them? I think everyone who works in sort of the epic fantasy, or just the fantasy realm, it's sort of criteria that you read Lord of the Rings. What he did, he sort of set the goal, set the standard, and no one has broken it. In my opinion, no one's broken it. yet. I mean, you can argue that George R.R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones, and J.K. Rowling, who did Harry Potter and so on, they touch on it, I think. Game of Thrones comes close, but Lord of the Rings is huge. Lord of the Rings is a small part of what Tolkien's world encapsulates. Just look at the Silmarillion. Lord of the Rings is tiny, and I have divulged in the bits of the Silmarillion and how he created the languages, and it's eye-opening. As for, I mentioned computer games like Final Fantasy. I mean, anyone who knows about Final Fantasy knows that these are also great worlds in video games. And as a kid, as a youngling, I played certain games. I've always been interested in the big stories. I mean, I like shoot-em-ups. I like quick games. They're interesting, they're fun, but you can zone out to them. When it comes to real gaming, I do enjoy Final Fantasy. I do enjoy a good story. I enjoy games like, you've probably heard of this, Oddworld, when you control as that little skinny blue guy called Abe. I love the Legacy of Kain series. It's just, again, it's underrated, that game, but it's a story-based game about vampires in a gothic world called Nosgoth, and you have to sort of go on a journey of revenge against the brothers who murdered you, and it's just, I loved these games growing up. I used to play them quite a bit, but I remember when I finished Final Fantasy VII, it's been regarded as one of the best games ever made, and I can agree with this. I love it. When I finished it, it's over 40 hours long. You could push it to 60 if you really want to play it properly, because there's so much in this world. But I remember finishing it, and I found myself sort of fantasizing what happened afterwards. What did these guys and girls do when the mission was over, when the journey was done? Where did they go? What did they do? And like when you read a fantastic book, you sort of have a gap in your evening. You sort of tend to think about that story afterwards. If you forget the story hours, days later, then that's a sign of a poor story. But if you're sort of longing for more and sort of fantasizing about more and wanting to go back to it at some point, that's a sign of a good one. And I simply wanted to... I think my story is, when you look at the Utopian Dream and the sequel I'm working on, Rise of the Black Dogs, and so on, I plan to write 5 of these. When you look at it, mine too fall into sort of the shadow of Tolkien. It's a whisper of Tolkien, essentially. So the only thing I can sort of set out to achieve is to write an epic fantasy to the best of my ability, not to beat Tolkien, not to sort of, oh, mine's better and this and this and this. No, it's not why you do it. You do it because it's like a trademark. It's like your sort of fingerprint on the genre.
You mentioned when you were at university you preferred to stay in and write rather than go out and party. Can you tell me why that?
I did go out and party. I did. I had my fair share of nights where I woke up, I couldn't remember where I was. I did do that stuff. But that's an important part of university. You go there to work, you go there to study, but you can't deny the nightlife. The first year especially, I did graphics. I went in, and basically all we were told to do is, can you use Photoshop? Can you use Illustrator? Can you draw? You do know what your name is. So you do all that, you pass the tests, and then you're free. You get up in the morning, you go to university for a couple of hours, then you come out, and then it's like, okay, what now do we do? And I went to the University of Glamorgan to start off with, in Pontypridd in Wales. And if you've been to Glamorgan, it's sort of kind of on a mountain, so there's the university, and then there's Pontypridd, which is about half an hour away. Apart from that, there's not much else. What else do you do besides go to the pub and just have a few, maybe 10 in the middle of the day? So I did enjoy university, of course I did, but there was always, I knew that, and again I quote Christopher Hitchens, this is something that you sort of have to do. There's always that burning, that longing to get on with it. So when I wasn't doing these things, I was writing, and sometimes I'd sacrifice nights out. I'd sacrifice some of that party life, that nightlife, that sort of, to write. Because there was also a big part of me that was like, you know, one day you're going to be, university's going to end, you're going to end up in a job, hopefully. You're going to do this, that, and the other, and life's only going to get more complicated. It's going to get harder. So you kind of need that. You need something in the back burner, even though it comes more to the forefront. You need something to work on. Because if I didn't make that decision to write this book, to start this sort of series, then I'd be sort of, I don't mean to sound so sort of bleak, but I'd be less of a person. I wouldn't have that much to say. So that sacrifice, that sacrifice for the party life was essential to sort of be who I am today.
Well, you mentioned you did graphics, and you've talked a lot about drawing and designing characters. So why did you choose to go down a writing path?
I think that's a good question. I still enjoy drawing. I still enjoy graphics. Graphics has helped me in. It helped me design my front cover. It's a good sort of know-how because I went down the self-published route, and I couldn't really afford a graphic artist to do my cover, to design my map, to, you know, this, that, and the other, to do it. I could do that stuff. I could sort of get halfway and provide some knowledge and some insight, and my books are going to be, the front cover, for example, is designed by me, with the help of another, of course. And of course, you look around at other people's work, but it's sort of my vision, my sort of. I can draw, I can doodle, I can sketch characters, I can, not as good as some, obviously, but graphics has really helped me sort of progress. I don't have to wait on a graphic designer anymore. I can do it myself. But I guess there's so much to do with when you're studying graphics now. It would be different to how it was, you know, when I went to uni, which was like almost 10 years ago now. The technology moves on so quickly. It's very hard to keep up, and graphics is an extremely stressful, extremely a time-consuming thing. And there's a lot of pressure. I mean, some of the conversations I had with my tutors, you know, they were working all the time on numerous projects. They had very little time for themselves, and quite selfishly, I wanted that time to myself to write. Writing was more of a priority, I guess. Graphics is important, but I fell in love with writing throughout graphic communication, throughout my graphic sort of career, if you want to call it that. Writing came more natural to me. I didn't need someone staring over my shoulder and looking. I could sort of learn and go as I chose, and I did. So I guess that's the reason why.
At one point you mentioned you felt the need to let go of writing and focus on like moving on with your life. Why did you feel that?
Yeah, this was after college. I mean, when I was in college, I just spent the last few years putting together all this work. I spent the last few years just sketching, quoting myself, you know, writing my own little passages, just working on this thing constantly, over and over again. Many a time, you know, my brothers would come into my room and see me poring over a sketch or a map or some words or stuff they couldn't really understand because this was all my world. I spent years doing that, you know, and when I got to university, because that college project paid off so well. I mean, I remember walking into the class one day, and my tutor, wonderful guy, Richard Brooks. It was a week in to this blue sky project. Now, a blue sky project is a term graphic designers use to work on anything. Like Richard gave us for the final year, he said, "Okay, blue sky project, do whatever you want." Okay, and it was a week in, and I still hadn't sort of come to the table with anything. Whereas a lot of people were doing this. One of my friends was doing the 7 Deadly Sins, which is incredible. I still got the posters, actually, they're really good. But I remember coming to college one day, and I plonked down this folder I've mentioned onto his desk, and I remember him flicking through it, and then he sort of picked it up and looked at me and said, you know, come here. And we had a chat in his office. So much work, so much time, so much effort, and when I got that project got me to university. It did its job. I got a distinction, and it gave me the points necessary to go to university. But when I was in university, there were other projects that needed my time, other assignments that needed working on, and the logical part of me was like, let this go. It's done its part. It's run its course. You've done it. Congratulations. Move on to something else. But I couldn't. I simply couldn't, because it had become emboldened me now. It had become such a sort of, it had become a mindset, thinking about certain scenes and chapters and building the world that I've been talking about for the past half hour. You can't really turn your brain off. Writers, there's a common sort of, again, I don't know who said it, but it's sort of an unwritten rule. Writers are never off the clock. We're always thinking. We're never, you know, chilling. We're always going over in our heads new ideas, new scenes. That's why it's always a good idea to keep a notebook on you at all times. I mean, I've got one in my bag right now. If I have an idea, I'll write it down. So I couldn't turn my brain off, essentially.
Okie dokie. And you put a lot of emphasis on researching historical facts and going into depth with maps and language, etc.
Yeah.
So why do you become so absorbed, or do you become so absorbed in creating worlds?
It's impossible not to. I mean, the process it's fiendishly complicated, but at the same time very, very simple. When you're designing because I came up with my own religion. Actually, I came up with a few religions. I mean, there's only one in the first book, but there's a few more pop up in the later books, which I'm writing now, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. But you look at history, you look at what's come before, you look at human behavior, and you read and you study, and that becomes your sort of foundation. You take the best parts, or maybe the worst parts of say, a religion, and then you build upon it in your own way. A bit like Minecraft, you know, you take the fundamental things and then you sort of just build upon them in using whatever blocks you want. And when you apply that method, it's similar to the scientific method, actually. You take something from nature and then you sort of confer it with what you know and what you want, and you can build. This is going to sound weird, but you kind of feel like God, you know, because we're talking about religion. You feel like, you know, you're creating this new sort of entity, and you're in control of everything. So yeah. I think that answers your question.
Okay. So you said you mentioned redoing your project a number of times, rewriting. So how's your level of skill changed throughout your writing time?
I've still got draft 1 of the first book, and it's horrendous. When I say horrendous, I mean I'm talking spelling errors, plot holes, what's the word? Inconsistencies in the story. And it's about vampires, believe it or not. There's I write a blog. The blog sort of is like the appendices of this book. When I started the blog, it was sort of another avenue. If people who were interested in my book could refer to the blog and see what else, because there's more to me than just this book, believe it or not. I do other things. But in this blog, I write about, in detail, how it all kind of began. If you just scroll through the blog, you can find the very first blog post I wrote was called A Project Fueled by Tea. That goes into details, massive details about how it all began. And then there's another one called Fangs in the Roots. That's a very good one. And it talks about the first draft I did. And the first draft I did actually is sort of centered around vampires. This was before Twilight came along and they all became vegan. But it was all centered around vampires. Now, 8 drafts later, it's got nothing to do with vampires in it. I mean, there is an origin story to do with a vampire, yes, but that's another project for another time. But that's the only hint of a vampire you get. It's got nothing to do with vampires now. So, but more importantly, you write your book, you write draft 1, and like every writer thinks naively, that's it, I'm done, finished. That's complete. That's wrong. You need to write it and then put it away and then look it up on it with fresh eyes. And when you do that, you will change. I mean, human beings are constantly changing. You know, when I was writing this thing, I finished in 2011. I think I finished, and then over the course of the next like 4 years, I spent rewriting, editing, and just going back and forth with ideas. That's when the real work takes place, during that stage. And it's important because what you wrote as a 17-year-old will be different to how you write as a 27-year-old, you know? I mean, you grow and evolve as a person, and you can see these inadequacies in your writing, you can see the flaws in your writing as you get older. So getting older is an essential part of writing. That's why you don't see many young writers out there. They're all like, you know, in their 70s and 80s. They're all like ancient, because they've had time to perfect their craft. So at the time, I never thought I'd write 7 or 8 drafts. At the time I thought draft 1 and 2 were fine, but if you love it, you'll make it the best of your ability.
You also talked briefly on writer's block, and
Yeah.
how did you overcome that?
It's
Or why did you keep going? You said it was easy to
I think
stop, take a break.
the longest time I've had writer's block for was about 7 months. I got to chapter 7 in book 1, and I stopped writing. I sort of fell out of love with it for a period of time, and I think it was at that point when I was like, yeah, this isn't going to go much further. But falling back on that quote I said, that Christopher Hitchens said, if you have that desire to do it, you will do it. Now, every writer will get writer's block at some point, and a lot of people will say, in contrary to what I will say, people will say go for a walk or something, stop doing what you're doing and have a sort of chill time. If that works for you, fine. But I say, in my experience, I went on a chill time for about 7 months. That's over half a year of time I could be writing, because I took that advice. Whereas what I say, just write, force yourself to do it, because you can turn garbage into gold doing this. But it depends on you. It depends on the writer. Some people, everyone works. Like I said, there's no rule book. There's no sort of grid you can follow. Do it how you want to do it. But if you're listening to this and you're suffering writer's block, write something. Get back on your computer or your typewriter or your whatever it is you use, and just keep writing. And you will write. You might write garbage. You probably will write garbage. But then you'll go back on that, and then you'll redo it, and you'll weave it into something that you can be proud of. Sometimes the worst chapters I've written, that I wrote, sort of start off terrible, but then as I work on them, they turn into my best. So keep writing.
And briefly right at the end there, you mentioned being proud of your work. Could you talk about your sense of pride as a writer?
Sense of pride. It's definitely something to add on the CV. It's something not... We're sitting in a room full of books, and I see people's struggles, I see people's lives poured onto paper. It's hard writing a book, it really is. You can't, it's not a You'll see a lot of information out there about how to write and get rich quick. Don't fall into that trap. It's not easy. If you want to write something that you love, write something that you care about, write a story, or write what you would want to read, what you would want to read. Because it's not easy, but the sense of reward is just it's one of the greatest experiences of my life, really. When you've worked on the project for as long as I have, my book is sort of a little bit the exception, because my book's, if you've seen it, it's big. It's a hefty book, and it's been with me for over 15 years now. So when you finally get that chance to sort of see it in hardback, it's a great feeling. And it's a massive sense of accomplishment. And I think, now that I'm really thinking about it, this book isn't going away. If it's almost like a legacy. It's a part of you that is on the shelf. Someone will pick up and read and empathize with. Whether they love it or hate it, that doesn't matter. It's there, and it's going to be there forever. I'm not going to last forever. There's going to be a point when the lights do go out. But this book, or these books, this series, is going to be here for the rest of, and it's a piece that will always remain, and it's a humbling feeling.
So can you tell me what you're thinking about when you're writing?
It depends on what scene it is, what chapter it is, where I'm at. It also depends what character it is, the tone. There's so much that comes into it. I think if you're writing a scene with two characters talking, it's a good idea to sort of have something else going on at the same time. Sometimes it's about not what is said, but what is sort of said between the words. One character might be talking about a particular event, and the other one might be answering the questions, but who knows, that character might be hiding something. It does depend on the scene you're writing, it depends on the characters, and it's a good idea to sort of read what others have done, and perhaps you should watch a few films, play a few games, and some of the greatest games and films and books I've ever read and watched and seen, there's more going on than just a conversation. Sometimes it's what's happening between the lines that is more important. What's not being said is very important. That creates more of an interesting scene. It gives sort of the reader something to think about. So it does depend. When you're writing a battle sequence, for example, you can't just have all the chaos splurged out in front of you. There's a sort of an order about it. And the more you practice, the more you write about this sort of thing, the better you'll get at it. There are a few battles, huge battles in my story. The battles are some of the most, I'm not going to lie, sometimes you write for the battle sequences. You do write to write those big epic fantasy battles. I do sometimes want to get to them, but then you can't just write about a battle. There has to be a certain context. You have to sort of care about the characters. There has to be a cause. A battle can't just be. A love sequence can't just be. There has to be a. Could you imagine our hero just imagine just watching a scene in a film or just reading a paragraph in a book where two characters fall in love, or when there's two armies collide. They're as grand and as spectacular as they'll be. There has to be an element of weight behind it. There has to be chemistry between two characters. There has to be a cause between two armies. And Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones have some huge battle sequences.
Now.
Cavalry! Charge!
wonderfully shot and wonderfully written about. If you've read them, they're incredible to read. But there's more going on than just the characters flinging swords around. There's so much more going on, and you need to, as a writer, you need to sort of encapsulate that element of depth in these characters. Like I said, characters are the drive of the story. If the characters aren't nailed, if the characters aren't down, aren't characterized, and if the audience can't empathize with them, you've got nothing. You have to care about them. It has to be a certain element of weight to the scene, and it's important to capture that. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Practice is the mother of skill.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet.
About, you need to sort of get yourself into that mindset, and depending on who you are as a writer will depend on how you do it. I mean, if I'm writing a battle sequence, it's nice to sort of listen to get your headspace into some music, listen to some crazy battle music, or I guess that's the best way to describe it, really. And it's the same, name another scene, and getting your head in that headspace with music, with pictures, with images, and with your own experiences. Put that into your words. Obviously, I've never been in a battle before, but I've been in some pretty scary encounters with people twice my size, and you just take that and you blow it up.
Do you have any aims or goals that you set yourself before or during a period of writing?
Not when I'm writing I'm writing the sequel to book 1 now, and when you write a chapter, you don't write all in one go. You write in pieces, but to tell a story within a story, a chapter has to be its own story in itself. It has to sort of have a beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't have to be perfect straight off the bat. It doesn't have to be 100, because when you write, you will inevitably go back to it. You'll write a chapter, leave it for a month, maybe even a year, and you'll get back to it eventually, and you will almost write it again, and you will add things again, and you will tweak it, and the story is this constantly evolving kind of organism. You'll write the book, leave it for a while, go back to it, and the characters may have changed. You may have forgotten something. The creative process never ends. It's constantly rejuvenating itself, and it's hard to sort of put full stop on the book and get it published, because there does come a point when you can't work on it anymore. It's like Play-Doh, essentially. It's like building something. Once you can keep playing with it and building it and molding it, but that Play-Doh is going to get hard and it turns into clay. The more you write, the harder it is to sort of mold. But that's the writing stage. You mold it, you play with it, you add to it, and there comes a point when you've got to let go. You've got to sort of go, okay, that's it, it's not going to get any better, and then you put it aside. So I guess the goal, when you're sitting down to write something, the goal is to try to sort of handle it and play with it as less as possible, because you're gonna go back to adventure at some point.
how does it feel being completely immersed in writing? I know you mentioned earlier the rabbit hole. Is that along the right lines? How does that feel?
It's crazy. I was going to say a swear word then, but it's crazy. Your craziness comes out when people talk to you. When you've been writing for a few hours straight about something that only you will understand, and you try to explain it to someone who's just inquiring about it. How's the book coming? What was your last chapter about? And you explain to them. They're kind of, by the end of it, they're looking at you quite cross-eyed and they're regretting asking you. It's like acting. I've never really acted before. I was in a few extra. I was an extra in a few films. If you've seen Captain America, I was in that for a bit. But I guess it's a bit like acting, where you sort of, when you're writing a character, for example, you aren't writing you. You aren't writing what you will say. You are writing what they will say. You are not you. You are them. And depending on your skill as a writer, and depending on how good you are at immersing yourself, will come out in your writing. So if you can be Nathaniel Prigien, one of my characters in book one, or Isabel, or Alexius, or Bragan, or Matthias, or the Magpie, or Rydian, all these guys, the better you are at being another character, the more powerful your book will be. So you get into that headspace of someone who is a knight, someone who is a thief, an assassin, a Starcaller, a priest, whatever. And again, you need to do your research on these guys. Depending on how you go into that character will show. But coming out of that phase and talking getting back to who you were, it can be quite tricky sometimes. you'd be sort of encapsulating the character you've been writing for hours, and you can take a while to come out. But that's why you do it alone. That's why you do it with alcohol. That's why you sort of show yourself away to avoid the craziness, to avoid the men in white coats.
So, how do you know how well you're doing while you're writing?
I don't actually know. I guess I write the story that I would like to read about. So, from my biased perspective, I'm writing the best thing that's ever been. I know that's not true. Far from it. There's so many good, talented writers out there. So many people who are just inspirational, who have wrote works that fortunately I couldn't come close to. I hope to. But, I guess people have read my work, and so far people have enjoyed it. People have hit me with fantastic, wonderful, warm compliments, and it's very touching. I guess that's a good sort of measure to sort of measure your work. That's a good way to measure your work of what other people think of it. You'll get some people who absolutely hate it. I haven't come across that person yet, but I'm sure I will at some point. But so far people have liked it, people have loved it, people want more, and that does fuel me to do better. But when it comes to me personally, I think I love what I do. I love doing this. I love creating worlds, and I love writing characters and writing these big, huge, epic scenes. So yeah, so far so good, I guess. So far so good.
And how does time feel to you when you're writing?
You can get up in the morning with the intention to do as much as possible, with the intention to do a chapter or finish off this paragraph or whatever. And you can end up staring at the screen for a good few hours. People often, my older brother, he accuses me of being extremely lazy. And if you were to watch a writer, yeah, they do look quite lazy. They're just sort of sitting there staring off into space. But that, in a strange way, that's working because you're in your own head. Because when you're writing a story as big and as complex as mine, with so many characters and so much going on and not going on, you need to sort of get yourself into that headspace, like what we talked about earlier. You need to sort of find that headspace, find that character, find that sort of inner voice, and apply it to what you're writing. That can take time, and you can set up, make yourself a coffee or whiskey, whatever it is, and then just spend the next 20 to 40 minutes just staring at the screen or just listening to some music, just trying to get yourself into that headspace. So time can either go extremely quickly, it can come quite naturally. Sometimes you can get up and just keep to it and just go. Other times it takes time to get into it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you sit at the computer and you're just sort of stuck, you're frozen. So it does vary. It depends what side of the bed you wake up on.
So, can you tell me about the level of control you feel when you're writing?
This is when I was writing. I'm so glad you asked this question. Writing book 1 was very ordered. I had a sort of a guideline, a loose guideline, and because it was my first attempt, it was kind of quite structured. It was kind of, I need this to happen at this point, I need that to happen at this point, and this to happen somewhere toward the end. And you meet those demands. Things happen along the way and you get inspired and things change, yes, and you move things around, that's fine. But because I'm writing episode 2, Rise of the Black Doves, I've decided to sort of approach it differently to the Utopian Dream. Rise of the Black Doves is going to be more sort of giving more power to the characters, giving more sort of freedom to them. Now that sounds weird, because I'm in control of it all, yes, but I want to sort of lose control. I want to sort of get into the headspace of the characters more. Like, for example, I love writing villains. Villains are incredible characters, almost more interesting than the protagonists. Writing protagonist is great, but he's nothing without the antagonist.
I'm glad you could make it. I only came for the kids. See this man? He's our big brother. But alas, in our happy flock, he's what you'd call a black sheep.
Cloud! Antagonists are fascinating. And when you're writing and the antagonists take control, sometimes you write your protagonists into a corner, and then my antagonists don't screw around. You know, there's no sort of holding breath, there's no sort of steady pause, there's no dramatic climax before the final blow. No, it's not like that. You know, it's more real, it's more ruthless, and I want to give more power to the characters. And in a sense, that sort of creates a new angle to write. So when you're reading, hopefully you'll be reading it, when you're reading the Utopian Dream, and then when Rise of the Black Doves comes out, you will see a difference in writing styles. Utopian Dream is very ordered and structured, whereas Rise of the Black Doves is more freeing, more dangerous, you know, it's more wild.
So lastly, can you tell me about how easy or difficult it is to maintain a sort of sense of flow while you're writing?
Yeah, I can sort of extend on the last question, really. It depends what's happening, it really does. Because I'm trying to write something dramatic, I'm trying to write something unique and exciting, and if the author, if I don't know what's about to happen, in in some instances, I know how the second book is going to take place. I know I've got my sort of milestones, and they have to be met, of course. Things have to happen to progress the story. But in between time, I do want to have more control to the characters. And writing on edge, writing without knowing kind of what's going to happen, or how this character's going to react, that's really, really cool, you know? It's like, when I don't know what's going to happen, it makes it even more exciting. And if I'm excited in a certain scene, I can almost guarantee my reader will be excited as well. Because if I'm bored with a particular scene, if I'm just sort of like, yeah, this is going to be, that's going to happen, la la la, that's probably what the reader's thinking as well. Whereas in this one, I really want to give more emphasis, more power to the characters, and that makes it more unpredictable, more dangerous, more free-flowing, and ultimately more exciting, just in general.
Fair enough. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome, it's been a pleasure.
So you never wanted a regular type life? The fuck is that? Barbecues and ball games? Yeah,